The ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles, but no light touched the girl pressed against the wall in the moth-eaten dress. They had brought Elara Whitmore here to be humiliated, one final cruelty in a life built on cruelties. She watched the nobles dance, their laughter sharp as broken glass, while her stepmother smiled like a predator who had already tasted blood. Elara's fingers trembled against the cold stone. She had learned to be invisible. She had mastered the art of disappearing while still breathing. But tonight, across that glittering floor, one pair of eyes found her, and everything shattered. Stay until the end to see how one moment of defiance changes everything. Drop a comment with your city below. Let's see where this story reaches tonight. The carriage wheels ground against frozen cobblestones, each rotation pulling Elara Whitmore closer to a fate she couldn't escape. She sat rigid on the cracked leather seat, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across from her, Beatrice, her stepsister, examined her reflection in a jeweled compact, lips pursed in practiced perfection. "Do try not to embarrass us tonight," Beatrice said without looking up, "though I suppose that's impossible in that dress." Elara didn't respond. She had learned years ago that silence was armor, that words only gave them ammunition. Instead, she stared through the carriage window at the blur of snow-covered streets, at the grand houses lit from within by warmth she would never know again. It had been 7 years since her father died. 7 years since the will was read and her world collapsed. 7 years since Elara Whitmore, the woman her father had married in his final lonely year, had smiled that cold smile and told 12-year-old Elara that things were going to change. The changes came swiftly. First, the staff was dismissed, all except Mrs. Hem, the housekeeper who had nowhere else to go. Then the accounts were reorganized. Elara's inheritance, the fortune her mother had left her, somehow became entangled in trusts and legal documents that Helena's lawyers assured everyone were perfectly legitimate. By the time Elara turned 13, she had been moved from her childhood bedroom to a servant's room in the attic. By 14, she was taking her meals in the kitchen. By 15, she had stopped asking questions because she already knew the answers would hurt. Now, at 19, she existed in a strange half-world, too well-born to be a true servant, too powerless to be anything else. She cleaned the fireplaces before dawn, mended Beatrice's gowns by candlelight, and answered to girl more often than her own name. Society had simply forgotten her. The few friends she'd had as a child had been quietly discouraged from visiting. The invitations that used to arrive for the Whitmore household never included her name anymore. She had become a ghost haunting her own life. "We're here," Beatrice announced, snapping the compact shut. She leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "Remember, Elara, you're only attending because Mother insisted. A bit of charity for the poor relation. So stay in the shadows where you belong." The carriage door opened. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the sound of music and laughter from Ironvale Castle. Elara's stomach twisted. She had begged not to come, had pleaded with Helena that morning. "Please," she had whispered, kneeling on the kitchen floor where Helena had found her scrubbing pots. "I don't have anything suitable to wear. I'll only—" "You'll wear what I provide," Helena had interrupted, her voice smooth as silk over steel. "The Duke of Ironvale has graciously invited the Whitmore household, all of us. It would be rude to refuse." The dress Helena had provided was a nightmare of yellowed lace and outdated ruffles, the kind a woman might have worn 30 years ago. It hung on Elara's thin frame like a costume from a tragic play, the hem dirty, the bodice loose enough to suggest poverty rather than modesty. Helena had stood in the doorway of Elara's attic room that evening, watching as she'd put it on, and smiled. "Perfect," she had said softly. "Absolutely perfect." Now stepping down from the carriage onto the pristine gravel drive, Elara understood. This wasn't charity, this was theater. Helena had brought her here to display her, to show society what happened to girls who had nothing and no one. To prove that the Whitmore name still commanded respect, even as they ground one of its bearers into dust. The castle rose before them, ancient stone warmed by golden light pouring from every window. Music spilled out into the winter night, violins and cellos weaving melodies that spoke of beauty and grace and everything Elara had lost. Guests streamed up the wide steps in furs and jewels, their laughter bright against the darkness. Elara followed her stepmother and stepsister at a careful distance, close enough to belong to their party, far enough to make the separation clear. No one looked at her directly. A few curious glances slid past, then away, as if her shabby dress made her too painful to acknowledge. The entrance hall stole her breath. Marble columns soared toward frescoed ceilings, and a double staircase curved upward like something from a fairy tale. Servants in pristine livery moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. Everything gleamed, the floors, the chandeliers, the diamonds at women's throats. "Stay close," Helena murmured, but her eyes were already scanning the crowd for more important people. Within moments, she and Beatrice had drifted away, absorbed into a cluster of society matrons. Elara stood alone near a potted palm, her heart hammering. A servant passed. Then another. Neither offered her champagne. She might as well have been invisible. "Good heavens, is that the Whitmore girl?" A woman's voice carrying. "I heard she'd become quite, reduced." "Helena's charity case," another replied. "How generous to bring her, though that dress—" Laughter, quickly muffled. Elara's face burned. She pressed closer to the palm, wishing she could disappear into its fronds. The crowd began moving toward the ballroom. Elara let herself be carried along, a leaf in a current of silk and diamonds. The ballroom doors opened and she stopped breathing. It was vast, impossibly vast, with walls of midnight blue and gold and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. 3 enormous chandeliers hung from the coffered ceiling, each dripping with thousands of crystals that caught the candlelight and threw it back in dancing prisms. The floor was polished marble, inlaid with patterns of silver and white. At the far end, an orchestra played on a raised platform, the music swelling to fill every corner. And the people, dozens, maybe hundreds, all of them beautiful, all of them belonging. Women in gowns of emerald and sapphire and ruby red, their hair swept into elegant arrangements. Men in perfectly tailored coats, their movements confident, their laughter easy. This was the world Elara had been born into, the world that should have been hers. Instead, she stood at the edge of it all, wearing her humiliation like a brand. She found a spot against the wall between 2 pillars, partially hidden by a tall arrangement of winter roses. From here, she could observe without being observed. She watched Beatrice accept a dance from a young lord, watched Helena hold court among the dowagers, watched the endless parade of wealth and privilege move through patterns as ancient as the castle itself. And then she saw him. Adrian Blackmore, Duke of Ironvale, stood near the orchestra, tall and dark-haired, his posture rigid as iron. He wore black, unrelieved black without ornamentation, and it made him look like a shadow cut from the brightness around him. His face was striking in a harsh way, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes the color of storm clouds. He was perhaps 25, though he carried himself with the weight of someone much older. He was also, Elara realized, utterly miserable. Oh, he hid it well. He smiled when spoken to, bowed when appropriate, accepted congratulations on the ball's magnificence with gracious nods. But his eyes were empty. They moved over the crowd without really seeing, touched on faces without connecting. He was present in body, but absent in spirit, going through motions he had performed 1,000 times before. Elara recognized it instantly because she saw the same thing in her own mirror every morning. Loneliness. The kind that lived so deep it had become part of your bones. "Magnificent ball, Your Grace," a woman in purple silk simpered up at him. "You've outdone yourself." "You're too kind, Lady Ashcroft," Adrian replied, his voice a rich baritone that carried even over the music. "I'm pleased it meets with your approval." "More than approval. Why, I was just telling dear Marina that this quite rivals the winter balls of old." "Don't you agree, darling?" A younger woman stepped forward, perhaps 20, with hair like spun gold and a dress of pale pink that must have cost a fortune. She was beautiful in the way of expensive paintings, perfect but somehow lifeless. "Indeed, mother," Marina Ashcroft said, her eyes fixed on Adrian with unmistakable calculation. "His Grace has always had impeccable taste." Something flickered across Adrian's face. Irritation? Resignation? But it vanished so quickly Elara thought she might have imagined it. He inclined his head politely. "You're generous, Miss Ashcroft." Perhaps you might honor my daughter with a dance, Lady Ashcroft pressed. I'm sure she would be delighted. I would be honored, Your Grace, Marina added, extending her hand with practiced grace. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he forced another smile. Of course, it would be my pleasure. As he led Marina onto the dance floor, Elara watched the stiffness in his shoulders, the careful distance he maintained even as they moved through the waltz. He danced perfectly, every step precise, every turn timed to the music, but there was no warmth in it, no joy. It was performance, not pleasure, just like everything else in this glittering cage. Pathetic, isn't she? Elara's head snapped around. Beatrice stood a few feet away with two other young women, all three of them staring directly at her. Her stepsister's voice had been just loud enough to carry. Who is that? One of the other girls whispered. My stepsister, Beatrice said, loading the word with contempt. Well, former stepsister, really. She's become rather diminished since her father died. Mother keeps her out of pity. In that dress? The third girl giggled. How charitable. Yes, well, one must do one's duty to the less fortunate. Beatrice's smile was poisonous. Even when they're too proud to accept their proper place. The words were weapons, each one precisely aimed. Elara's face burned. Her hands shook. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to run from this place and never come back. But she had nowhere to run to. The Whitmore house wasn't her home anymore. This world wasn't her world. But there was no other world waiting for her. So she stood there and took it, her eyes fixed on the floor, while Beatrice and her friends laughed. The dance ended. Marina Ashcroft clung to Adrian's arm, tilting her face up at him with practiced adoration. Your Grace, might we take some air? It's rather warm in here. Adrian's eyes swept the ballroom and landed directly on Elara. For one impossible moment, their gazes locked. Elara saw her own reflection in his storm-gray eyes, alone, trapped, slowly suffocating in a world that had no place for either of them. She saw recognition flash across his face, as if he'd suddenly spotted a mirror in an unexpected corner. He saw her. Actually saw her, in a way no one had in years. Then Marina tugged at his arm, and the moment shattered. Adrian looked away, murmuring something polite to his companion. They moved toward one of the balcony doors. Elara released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her heart was racing, her skin flushed despite the cold that crept in around the windows. That look, what had that been? Imagination? Wishful thinking from a girl who had been invisible for so long she'd started seeing things that weren't there? Elara. She jumped. Beatrice stood before her, alone now, her expression sly. Mother wants to speak with you. She's on the east balcony. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Privately. Every instinct Elara possessed screamed warning. Why? How should I know? Beatrice shrugged. Perhaps she's feeling generous. Perhaps she wants to tell you you've suffered enough. She leaned closer, her breath hot against Elara's ear. Or perhaps she wants to arrange a better situation for you, a position somewhere far from here. Wouldn't that be lovely? A fresh start? Despite herself, Elara felt a flicker of hope. She hated herself for it, hated how desperate she had become that even the smallest possibility of escape seemed like salvation. Which balcony? Beatrice pointed to a set of glass doors partially hidden by velvet curtains. Through there. She's waiting. Elara hesitated. Everything about this felt wrong, but what choice did she have? If there was even the smallest chance that Helena had found her a position somewhere else, somewhere she could start over. Thank you, she whispered. Beatrice's smile widened. Don't mention it, really. Don't. Elara moved toward the doors, her shabby dress rustling against the marble floor. Around her, the ball continued in all its glittering glory, couples dancing, champagne flowing, laughter rising like smoke toward the chandeliers. No one noticed the thin girl in the yellow dress slipping through the curtains. No one except a pair of storm-gray eyes that tracked her movement from across the room. Elara pushed through the glass doors and stepped onto the balcony. The cold hit her like a fist. The temperature had dropped drastically since they'd arrived, and now the wind cut through her thin dress as if it weren't there at all. Snow had begun to fall, light flakes that swirled in the lamplight from the ballroom. The balcony was empty. Helena? Elara called softly. No answer. She turned back toward the doors and froze. Through the glass, she saw Beatrice. Her stepsister stood just inside, one hand on the door handle. Their eyes met. Beatrice smiled and turned the key in the lock. No! Elara lunged for the door, her hand slamming against the glass. Beatrice, wait! But Beatrice was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd without a backward glance. The key glinted in her hand before she slipped it into her bodice. Elara's heart stopped, then started again, racing with panic. She pounded on the glass. Please, someone! I'm locked out here! Inside, the ball continued. The music swelled. Dancers spun past, their faces bright with laughter, so close she could have reached through the glass and touched them. But the glass was thick, built to keep out winter's worst, and the music was loud. No one heard her. No one turned. She beat her fists against the door until her hands ached. Please, please, can anyone hear me? A couple danced past the window. The woman was laughing at something her partner had said. She didn't even glance toward the balcony. Elara's breath came in short gasps now, white clouds in the freezing air. The wind picked up, driving snow against her bare arms, her exposed neck. She had no coat, no shawl, nothing but the thin, ridiculous dress that offered about as much protection as paper. She was going to freeze out here. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a momentary cruelty. Beatrice had locked her out on a night when the temperature was well below freezing, when snow was falling and the wind was rising. She had locked her out and walked away. And inside, where it was warm and bright and safe, no one was coming to help. Elara slid down the glass door, her legs giving out. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to conserve what little warmth she had left. Her teeth chattered. Her fingers were already going numb. Through the glass, she watched the ball. Watched the beautiful people in their beautiful clothes, dancing their beautiful dances. Watched Elara Whitmore accept compliments with gracious smiles. Watched Beatrice laugh at something a young lord said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They knew. Of course they knew. Helena had probably planned this from the beginning. Bring Elara to the ball, humiliate her with the dress, and then this. A final cruelty. Perhaps even a final solution. After all, what would happen if a sickly, neglected girl simply didn't survive the winter? There would be an investigation, certainly, but Helena was respected, connected. Beatrice would swear her stepsister had wandered out onto the balcony of her own accord, perhaps overcome by the heat of the ballroom, a tragic accident, nothing more. Elara's vision blurred with tears that froze on her cheeks. She had been a fool. All these years she had survived by being quiet, by being invisible, by convincing herself that if she just endured long enough, something would change. But nothing had changed. Nothing would ever change, unless she changed it herself. The thought came from somewhere deep inside, from a part of her she'd thought had died along with her father. She looked down at her shaking hands, at the ridiculous dress that was supposed to shame her. Then she looked through the glass at the glittering ballroom beyond. They wanted her to beg, to pound on the glass and plead and prove how powerless she was. So she wouldn't. Slowly, fighting against the cold that made every movement agony, Elara stood. Her legs trembled, but they held. She brushed snow from her shoulders with numb fingers. Then she stepped back from the door, straightened her spine, and faced the ballroom. She didn't pound on the glass, didn't cry out. Instead, she simply stood there, visible through the window to anyone who cared to look, her chin raised, her eyes clear. If she was going to die out here, she would die standing. The wind howled around her, but she didn't flinch. Snow gathered on her hair, her shoulders, the ridiculous ruffles of her dress, but she didn't brush it away. She just stood, a ghost made flesh, a monument to every silent indignity she had ever endured. And across the ballroom, through the whirl of dancers and the shimmer of candlelight, Adrian Blackmore saw her. He had been moving mechanically through the evening's obligations, another dance with another society daughter, another conversation with another ambitious mother, when something made him look up. Perhaps it was the stillness. In a room full of motion, one point of absolute stillness stood out like a shout. There, beyond the glass doors of the east balcony, stood a girl. She wore a dress from another era, yellowed and shabby, dusted now with snow. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever style it had been arranged in and hung in tangles around her thin face. Her lips were turning blue. She was shaking so hard he could see it even from across the room. But her eyes burned with something fierce and unbreakable, not pleading, not afraid, just present, witnessing her own suffering with a clarity that was somehow more terrible than any amount of tears. Adrian's partner said something, but he didn't hear it. He was already moving, cutting through the dancers with long strides. People turned to stare. The Duke never moved with such urgency, such obvious emotion, but he didn't care. He reached the doors and grabbed the handle. Locked. "Who has the key?" His voice cut through the music like a blade. The dancing stuttered. Conversations died. All eyes turned toward him. "Your Grace?" One of the servants stepped forward, nervous. "The key to which door?" Adrian pointed to the balcony. To the girl standing on the other side of the glass, her body racked with shivers, her eyes still fixed straight ahead with that terrible, beautiful defiance. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Suddenly, everyone could see what they had been trained not to see, the girl freezing on the balcony while they danced. "The east balcony," Adrian said, each word precise and cold. "Who locked it?" Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, Beatrice's voice, high and false. I'm not sure, Your Grace. I thought I saw her go out there earlier. Perhaps the wind—" "The wind," Adrian repeated softly, dangerously, "does not turn keys." He looked at the servant. "Fetch the key, now." "I'll need to get it from the housekeeper, Your Grace. That might take too long." Adrian turned back to the door. Through the glass, he could see the girl's face clearly now. Her lips were nearly purple. Her shaking had intensified to the point that she could barely stand. She wasn't going to last much longer. Someone appeared at his elbow, his steward, holding out a ring of keys. "Perhaps one of these, Your Grace?" Adrian snatched them and tried each one. None fit. Behind him the crowd murmured. Elara Whitmore pushed through, her face a mask of concern. "Your Grace, please, that's my stepdaughter. She's always been a bit unstable. I'm sure she wandered out there herself. If we could just be silent." Adrian didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made Helena step back as if struck. The girl's knees buckled. She caught herself against the doorframe, still trying to stand, still refusing to fall. Something inside Adrian snapped. He turned, grabbed a gilt chair from against the wall, and before anyone could react, swung it with all his strength at the glass door. The sound of shattering glass silenced the entire ballroom. Shards exploded inward, glittering like diamonds as they scattered across the marble. The music stopped. Someone screamed. But Adrian was already reaching through the broken frame, heedless of the jagged edges, pulling the girl into his arms. She collapsed against him, her body ice-cold, trembling violently. He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her, pulling her tight against his chest. She weighed almost nothing, all sharp angles and bird-hollow bones. "Get the physician," he ordered. "Now." Servants scattered. The crowd pressed closer, a wall of shocked faces and whispering voices. Adrian turned in a slow circle, his arms still locked around the freezing girl, his gray eyes burning with a fury that made even the boldest step back. His gaze found Elara Whitmore, found Beatrice pale and stammering beside her, found every face that had laughed, every person who had seen and done nothing. "This girl," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom, "is Elara Whitmore. And as of this moment, she is under my protection." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples in every direction. Protection. A duke's protection. It meant everything and nothing, implied claim without promising specifics. But in this world, in this moment, it changed everything. Helena's face went white. Beatrice made a small, strangled sound. Adrian looked down at the girl in his arms. Her eyes had closed, her breathing shallow. But just before darkness took her, her frozen fingers closed on his shirt, not desperately, not pleading, but with the simple trust of someone who had finally found solid ground after years of drowning. "Get her somewhere warm," he said to the servants who had reappeared with blankets and heated stones. "My private study, fire in the hearth. And someone send for Dr. Graves immediately." As they moved to obey, Adrian carried Elara himself, the crowd parting before them like a sea. Behind him, the ballroom remained frozen, the shattered glass on the floor, the shocked silence, the ball that had become something else entirely. At the door, he paused and looked back one last time. His eyes found Helena's, held them. "If she doesn't survive," he said softly, "neither will this family's reputation. I suggest you pray very hard tonight, Mrs. Whitmore. Pray that she wakes up." Then he was gone, carrying the ghost of a girl through hallways she had walked as a decoration, toward a future neither of them could yet imagine. Behind him, in the ballroom where silver light still sparkled and music had once played, people began to whisper. The story was already spreading, growing wings, taking flight. The Duke of Ironvale had shattered glass for a nobody. The Duke of Ironvale had claimed a servant girl. The Duke of Ironvale had done the impossible. He had seen the girl no one else could see, and in seeing her, had changed everything. The fire crackled in the hearth of Adrian's private study, but Elara couldn't stop shaking. She lay on a leather sofa pulled close to the flames, buried under 3 heavy blankets and surrounded by heated stones wrapped in cloth. Her fingers and toes burned as feeling slowly returned to them, 1,000 needles stabbing into flesh that had gone dangerously numb. Dr. Graves hovered nearby, his weathered face creased with concern. He'd been the Blackmore family physician for 30 years and had seen his share of winter injuries, but the fury in the Duke's eyes when he'd arrived had been something new. "She'll recover," Graves said quietly, rolling down his sleeves. "Another 15 minutes out there, though." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Adrian stood by the window, his back to the room, hands clasped behind him so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He hadn't spoken since carrying Elara inside, hadn't moved except to step aside when the doctor needed space to work. But Elara could feel the anger radiating from him like heat from the fire, controlled, focused, and absolutely lethal. "Your Grace," Graves said, packing his instruments, "I'll leave laudanum for the pain, and she should drink warm broth every hour. Keep her by the fire tonight, no sudden movements for at least a day. She'll have everything she needs." Adrian's voice was flat, emotionless. Somehow that made it more frightening. After Graves left, silence filled the study. Elara tried to sit up, but her muscles screamed in protest. She managed to prop herself on one elbow, pulling the blankets tighter around her shoulders. The Duke's coat, the one he'd wrapped around her in the ballroom, lay folded on a nearby chair, still holding the warmth of his body. "Thank you," she whispered. Her throat was raw from the cold. "Your Grace, Don't." Adrian turned from the window. His face was composed now, the fury locked away behind aristocratic control, but his eyes still burned. "Don't thank me for basic human decency. Don't apologize for nearly dying because someone locked you outside like an animal." Elara flinched. When he put it that way, stark and unadorned, the horror of it crashed over her anew. Beatrice had tried to kill her. Not in a moment of passion, not in an accident, but with cold, calculated cruelty. And Helena had known, must have known. "They won't face consequences," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Adrian's jaw tightened. "They will. I promise you that." "You don't understand." Elara shook her head, the movement making her dizzy. "My stepmother is connected. She has friends in every great house, favors owed to her from half the peerage. And Beatrice," her voice cracked, "Beatrice will cry and say it was a prank gone wrong, that she didn't realize how cold it was, that she came back to unlock the door, but I'd already been rescued. People will believe her because it's easier than believing the truth. The truth being that they wanted me dead." The words hung in the air like smoke. Not dramatically, not publicly, but quietly. An unfortunate accident. A weak girl who caught a chill and never recovered. No one would question it because no one remembers I exist. Adrian crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt beside the sofa, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, the hard line of his mouth, the absolute conviction in his expression. "I remember," he said, "and after tonight, so does everyone else. You are under my protection now, Miss Whitmore. That means something in this world, whether you believe it or not." "It means scandal," Elara whispered. "A duke claiming a nobody as his ward? Society will tear both of us apart." "Let them try." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I've been looking for a reason to shake this world up. Thank you for providing one." Before Elara could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Adrian rose smoothly, his expression hardening again. "Enter." The door opened to reveal his steward, Morrison, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Your Grace, Mrs. Helena Whitmore is demanding to see her stepdaughter. She's quite insistent." "I'm sure she is." Adrian's voice dripped ice. "Tell Mrs. Whitmore that Miss Elara Whitmore is resting under physician's orders and cannot be disturbed. Tell her also that I will be calling on her tomorrow at precisely 10 o'clock to discuss certain matters. She would do well to be available." Morrison bowed. "Very good, Your Grace. And the guests?" "The ball is over. See them out." "Your Grace, it's barely past midnight." "Morrison." Adrian's tone allowed no argument. "The ball is over." The steward paled. "At once, Your Grace." When the door closed, Elara struggled to sit fully upright despite her body's protests. "You can't end your own ball early because of me. The scandal is already inevitable," Adrian interrupted. "I shattered glass doors in front of the entire aristocracy and carried you out like something from a melodrama. Ending the festivities early is the least scandalous thing I'll do tonight." He paused, studying her face. "Unless you'd prefer I send you back to them, to your loving family." "No!" The word came out sharp with panic. Elara caught herself, lowered her voice. "No, please, I can't." She stopped, fighting the tears that suddenly threatened. She'd survived 7 years by not crying, by not showing weakness, but tonight had cracked something open inside her, and she couldn't seal it back up. "I have nowhere else to go," she finished quietly. "The house isn't mine anymore. Nothing is mine. If you send me back, I won't survive the winter. One way or another, Helena will make sure of it." Adrian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He pulled a chair close to the sofa and sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Then you won't go back. You'll stay here, at Ironvale, as my ward. I'll arrange proper rooms for you, a lady's maid, clothing, everything you need. Tomorrow we'll discuss the legal particulars, but for tonight, just rest. You're safe here." "Why?" Elara searched his face, trying to understand. "You don't know me. I'm nobody. A girl in a ridiculous dress who got locked on a balcony. Why would you risk your reputation for someone like me?" For a long moment, Adrian didn't answer. He stared into the fire, his expression distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. 3 years ago, my father died. He left me this dukedom, this castle, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and a very specific set of instructions. Marry well, produce an heir, maintain the Blackmore name with honor and dignity. Don't make waves, don't question the social order, just exist within it, perpetuating the same cycles, the same cruelties, the same emptiness. He looked at her then, and she saw echoes of her own loneliness in his eyes. "I've been doing exactly that for 3 years," he continued. "Dancing the dances, attending the balls, courting the appropriate women, saying the appropriate things, and every day I feel more like a ghost in my own life. Tonight, when I saw you standing on that balcony..." He stopped, searching for words. "You were the first real thing I'd seen in years, the first person who refused to pretend. You were freezing to death, and you still wouldn't beg. You just stood there, witnessing your own suffering with your eyes open. And I thought, if you can be that brave in the face of death, maybe I can be brave enough to actually live." Elara's breath caught. She'd never heard anyone speak with such raw honesty, such naked truth. In her world, their world, people wrapped everything in layers of politeness and propriety until the truth suffocated beneath. "I'm not brave," she whispered. "I'm just tired of being invisible." "Then be visible." Adrian's intensity pinned her in place. "Stay here. Let me help you reclaim what was stolen, and in return, help me remember what it means to be human instead of a title walking around in expensive clothes." It was madness. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of reckless decision that would destroy both their reputations. And yet, as Elara looked at this strange, fierce duke who had shattered glass for her without hesitation, she felt something shift inside her chest. The first stirring of hope she'd felt in 7 years. All right, she said softly. I'll stay. The ghost of that smile touched Adrian's mouth again. Good. Now rest. Tomorrow, we begin the real fight. But Elara barely heard him. Warmth and exhaustion were finally winning their war against adrenaline, and her eyes drifted closed despite her best efforts. The last thing she felt was Adrian tucking the blankets more securely around her shoulders, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands that had broken glass. She woke to daylight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of chocolate. For one disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the balcony, the cold, the shattering glass, Adrian's fierce eyes promising protection. She sat up carefully, relieved to find the worst of the pain had faded to a dull ache. Someone had moved her during the night to an actual bedroom, a beautiful room with powder blue walls and white furniture, nothing like her attic cell at the Whitmore house. Her ridiculous yellow dress was gone, replaced by a soft nightgown in cream silk. On the bedside table sat a tray with hot chocolate, toast, and a small vase of winter roses. You're awake. A woman appeared in the doorway, middle-aged, competent-looking, with kind eyes. I'm Mrs. Rowan, the head housekeeper. His Grace asked me to see to your needs. How are you feeling? Better. Thank you. Elara touched the nightgown. Did you, changed your clothing? Yes. The other dress was ruined, I'm afraid. His Grace has sent for a modiste from town. She should arrive this afternoon to measure you for proper gowns. Mrs. Rowan bustled in, checking the fire, adjusting curtains with practiced efficiency. In the meantime, I've brought some things that should fit well enough. My daughter's about your size. Elara's throat tightened. Such simple kindness, but after 7 years of cruelty, it felt overwhelming. That's very generous. Nonsense. You'll need something suitable to wear when you meet with His Grace's solicitor this morning. Solicitor? Mr. Pembroke, he's waiting in the library. Mrs. Rowan smiled at Elara's obvious confusion. His Grace doesn't waste time when he's made up his mind about something. He sent for Pembroke at dawn. Something about inheritance law and fraudulent trustees, from what I overheard. Elara's heart began to race. Her inheritance, the money her mother had left her, the fortune that Helena had somehow tangled up in legal documents and trusts. Could it be recovered? After all these years, could she actually get it back? An hour later, washed and dressed in a simple but well-made day dress of dove gray, Elara entered the library. It was an enormous room, 3 stories tall, with a spiral staircase connecting the levels. Books lined every wall, thousands of them, leather-bound and gold-stamped. Morning light poured through tall windows, and a fire crackled in a marble fireplace. Adrian stood by one of the windows, speaking quietly with a thin man in spectacles, presumably Mr. Pembroke. When the door opened, both men turned. Miss Whitmore, Adrian said, please sit. Would you like tea? No, thank you. Elara perched on the edge of an overstuffed chair, her hands folded in her lap. She felt small in this grand room, insignificant, but she forced her spine straight, remembering how she'd stood on the balcony. If she could face death without begging, she could face this. Pembroke cleared his throat. Miss Whitmore, His Grace has asked me to investigate the matter of your inheritance. I need to ask you some questions about your father's will and the subsequent management of your estate. For the next hour, Elara answered as best she could. She told them about her mother's death when she was 6, the fortune her mother's family had left in trust for her, about her father remarrying when she was 11, about Helena's kindness in those early days, or what had seemed like kindness, about the will reading after her father's death, how the lawyers had explained that her inheritance was complicated, tied up in investments that required Helena's management until Elara turned 21. And you trusted this? Pembroke asked, his pen scratching across paper. I was 12, Elara said quietly. What choice did I have? Adrian, who had been listening in silence, spoke for the first time. Did your father's will actually appoint Mrs. Whitmore as trustee? I don't know. I never saw the will itself. The lawyers read portions aloud, but she trailed off, feeling foolish. She should have demanded to see it, should have fought harder, should have done something besides accept Helena's word. Most 12-year-old girls wouldn't think to question lawyers and legal documents, Pembroke said gently, reading her expression, especially not when grieving their father. You were deliberately kept ignorant, Miss Whitmore. That's not your fault. Can you get it back? The question burst out of her. My inheritance, can it be recovered? Pembroke exchanged a glance with Adrian. That depends on several factors. If Mrs. Whitmore has been embezzling or mismanaging the funds, we have legal recourse. But we'll need documentation, bank records, investment statements, proof of how the money has been handled. I'll need to examine your father's will directly, not just trust the reading that was given. Helena will never cooperate, Elara said. She'll fight this with everything she has. Then we fight harder. Adrian's voice was steel. Pembroke, I want a full investigation. Hire whatever experts you need. I'll cover the costs. Your Grace, I must advise, Pembroke began. I know. It will be expensive and potentially fruitless. I don't care. Adrian's eyes found Elara's. If there's even a chance of recovering what was stolen from you, we take it. Elara felt something crack open in her chest again. This man, this Duke who had every reason to protect his own interests, his own reputation, was offering to wage legal war on her behalf without guarantee of success. She didn't understand it. Couldn't understand it. Why? She whispered. Adrian's expression softened. Because it's right, and because I'm tired of watching the powerful prey on the powerless, while everyone looks away. Before Elara could respond, Morrison appeared in the doorway, looking even more uncomfortable than he had the night before. Your Grace, I apologize for the interruption, but there are visitors. I'm not receiving, Adrian said curtly. Your Grace, it's Lord Chancellor Ashcroft, and he has magistrates with him. The room went very still. Elara's blood turned to ice. Lord Chancellor Ashcroft, Marina's father, one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. If he was here with magistrates, this wasn't a social call. Adrian's face could have been carved from stone. Show them to the drawing room. I'll be there momentarily. When Morrison left, Pembroke stood quickly. Your Grace, if Ashcroft has brought magistrates, he's attempting to intimidate me. Standard tactic. But Adrian's hands had curled into fists at his sides. Miss Whitmore, you should return to your rooms. No. Elara rose on shaking legs. If this is about me, I should be there. It's about Helena making her countermove faster than I anticipated, Adrian said grimly. She's gone to the Ashcrofts, probably spinning some tale about me abducting her innocent stepdaughter. With Ashcroft's influence, she could make this very ugly, very quickly. Then I need to tell them the truth. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Stay behind me. Let me speak first. And Miss Whitmore, no matter what they say, no matter what they accuse you of, remember, you nearly died last night. That's the truth. And truth is the strongest weapon we have. They entered the drawing room together, Adrian first, Elara a half step behind, Pembroke bringing up the rear. Lord Chancellor Ashcroft stood by the fireplace, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of face that had sent countless defendants to prison. Beside him stood two magistrates in their official robes, and near the window, Helena Whitmore wrung her hands convincingly, while Beatrice dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Your Grace, Ashcroft said, his voice grave. Thank you for receiving us. I'm afraid we come on unfortunate business. Indeed, Adrian's tone could have frozen water. What business brings the Lord Chancellor to my door unannounced? The matter of Miss Elara Whitmore. Ashcroft gestured to Elara, who fought to keep her expression neutral. Mrs. Whitmore has made serious allegations regarding her stepdaughter's presence in your household. She claims the girl is here against her will, that you removed her forcibly from the ball last night without proper guardianship or consent. Elara's jaw dropped. The sheer audacity of it. Helena, who had orchestrated her near murder, now claiming she'd been abducted? That's a lie, Elara said, her voice shaking with anger. I'm here because they locked me outside to freeze, because my stepmother wanted me dead. You see? Helena's voice trembled with perfectly performed distress. The poor child is confused, traumatized. Your Grace, I know you meant well, but Elara has always been delicate, given to flights of fancy and dramatic claims, taking her from her family home, from those who know how to care for her. Care for her? Adrian's voice cracked like a whip. Is that what you call dressing her in rags and locking her outside in sub-zero temperatures? An accident, Beatrice whimpered. right on cue. I swear it was an accident. The door stuck and I couldn't get it open. I was about to get help when you... She dissolved into convincing sobs. One of the magistrates stepped forward. Your Grace, Mrs. Whitmore is Miss Elara's legal guardian until she reaches majority. Regardless of the circumstances last night, you had no authority to remove her from her guardian's custody. We must ask that you return the young lady to her family immediately. No. The word came out flat, absolute. Ashcroft's eyes narrowed. Your Grace, I understand you acted from good intentions, but the law is clear. The law is clear that guardians have a duty of care, Pembroke interrupted smoothly. A duty Mrs. Whitmore has flagrantly violated. Look at Miss Whitmore, gentlemen. She still bears the marks of exposure. Dr. Graves examined her last night and will testify that 15 more minutes in those conditions would have been fatal. Is that proper guardianship? Doctors' examinations can be influenced, one magistrate said carefully, particularly when the physician serves at the pleasure of a duke. Elara felt the trap closing. They were going to take her back. Helena had played this perfectly, appealing to Ashcroft, bringing magistrates, wrapping everything in legal language that made Adrian look like an impulsive noble abducting a helpless girl. The truth didn't matter. Only power mattered, and Helena had borrowed enough of it to win. I have proof, Elara heard herself say. Every eye in the room turned to her. Proof of what, dear? Helena's voice dripped false concern. You've been through such an ordeal. Proof that you've been stealing from me for 7 years. Elara stepped forward, her heart hammering. She had no proof, not yet, but she had something better, the truth and the willingness to speak it without flinching. My mother left me a fortune. You convinced my father to marry you, and when he died, you took control of my inheritance. You've been embezzling it ever since, haven't you? That's why you wanted me dead. Because in 2 years I turned 21, and I could demand an accounting you can't provide. Helena's face went white, then red. How dare you? The house I grew up in isn't mine anymore, is it? You sold it. The investments my mother's family made for me. Where did those go? The trust fund, the properties, the shares in the merchant companies? What happened to all of it, Helena? You ungrateful little... Helena caught herself, swallowed her rage, and turned to the magistrates with desperate composure. Gentlemen, you see what I mean? These wild accusations, this paranoia, it's why she needs proper care. Professional care, perhaps. There are facilities. You want to lock me away. Elara's voice was steady now, clear. First you tried to freeze me to death. When that failed, you'll declare me mad and put me in an asylum. Either way, I disappear, and you keep my fortune. This is absurd, Beatrice burst out. Mother has done nothing but sacrifice for you, fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head. In an attic, Elara said, as a servant, while you wore silk and ate from silver plates bought with my inheritance. These are serious accusations, Ashcroft said slowly. His eyes moved between Elara and Helena with new calculation. Mrs. Whitmore, perhaps it would be prudent to provide documentation of your stewardship of Miss Elara's estate. Surely you have records. Helena's face froze. Just for a second, but Elara saw it. Naked panic flickering across her stepmother's features before the mask of composure slammed back into place. Of course I have records, Helena said. Though I resent being treated like a criminal when I've done nothing but... Then produce them, Adrian cut in. Today, every bank statement, every investment ledger, every receipt for 7 years. Pembroke will examine them. I don't answer to your solicitor, Your Grace. Then answer to a magistrate. Adrian turned to the men in robes. Gentlemen, I formally request an investigation into Mrs. Whitmore's management of her stepdaughter's inheritance. If she's as innocent as she claims, the records will prove it. The magistrates exchanged glances. This was dangerous ground, investigating a well-connected widow on the word of a girl who had been nobody until yesterday. But the accusations were specific enough to demand response, and Adrian Blackmore was a duke. They couldn't simply dismiss him. We will, look into the matter, one magistrate said carefully. Mrs. Whitmore, you'll need to provide documentation to our office within the week. A week? Elara felt her brief hope crumble. In a week, she'll have destroyed anything incriminating or forged new records. You have to act now as we follow proper procedures. the magistrate said firmly. We cannot simply raid a respectable woman's home on unsubstantiated. I'll substantiate them. Adrian's voice cut through the room like a blade. I'm formally filing a complaint of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder on behalf of Miss Whitmore. As her protector, I have that right. That should give you sufficient cause to seize records immediately. Ashcroft's eyes hardened. Your Grace, you're making very dangerous accusations against a woman of good standing. If you're wrong, the scandal will destroy you. I'm not wrong. Adrian met his gaze steadily. And I'm willing to stake my reputation on it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Elara could barely breathe. Adrian had just declared war. Not subtle maneuvering, not careful legal challenges, but open, public war against a woman with powerful friends and dangerous secrets. Helena's mask finally cracked, her face twisted with pure hatred as she looked at Elara. You stupid, ungrateful child! After everything I did for you, you did nothing for me but steal and abuse and try to erase me, Elara said quietly. But I'm still here, and now everyone knows it. Helena turned on Adrian. This isn't over, Your Grace. You have no idea what you've started. On the contrary, Adrian said coldly, I know exactly what I've started. The question is whether you're prepared for where it ends. The Lord Chancellor cleared his throat. Gentlemen, I think we have sufficient information to proceed. Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Beatrice, you should return home. Your Grace, Miss Elara will remain in your custody pending investigation, but I warn you, any hint of impropriety, and we will remove her to neutral guardianship immediately. Understood. Adrian's jaw was tight. As Helena and Beatrice were escorted out, Beatrice turned back at the door. Her tear-streaked face held nothing but venom. You think you've won? She hissed at Elara. You think he'll protect you when the entire society turns against him? When the Ashcrofts call in their favors and his name becomes poison? He'll throw you back to us within a month, and then you'll learn what real suffering is. Then she was gone, and Elara stood trembling in the drawing room, realizing exactly what she'd done. She'd turned a private nightmare into a public scandal. She'd forced Adrian into a position where he had to defend her or lose all credibility. She'd made enemies of people with the power to destroy them both. I'm sorry, she whispered as the magistrates left. I shouldn't have. You didn't ask for this. Stop. Adrian's voice was gentle now. You did exactly right. You spoke truth to power, and yes, it will cost us both. But some things are worth the cost. Your reputation is already compromised. I broke glass doors in front of the entire aristocracy, remember? He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. We're committed now, Miss Whitmore. The only way through is forward. Pembroke, who had been watching everything in silence, finally spoke. Your Grace, Lord Chancellor Ashcroft's involvement changes things. He's not here just because Helena asked him. There's something else at play. Marina, Adrian said quietly. He's positioning his daughter. If I'm publicly tied to defending Elara, I can't court Marina without it looking like I'm betraying my ward. He's forcing my hand. Forcing it toward what? Elara asked. Adrian's expression darkened. Toward a choice I thought I'd already made. 3 years ago, before my father died, he and Ashcroft discussed a marriage alliance between our families. Nothing formal, no contract, but an understanding. Ashcroft's been waiting for me to honor it. And now he'll use this scandal to pressure you, Pembroke finished. Marry Marina, and the investigation disappears. Refuse, and he'll ensure the magistrates find enough evidence to discredit both of you. Elara's stomach dropped. She'd thought the fight was against Helena, against stolen inheritance and attempted murder. But it was bigger than that. It was about power and alliances and the machinery of privilege that ground up anyone who challenged it. You should let me go, she said numbly. Back to Helena or to an asylum or wherever they want. You can't sacrifice your entire future for what? Adrian's eyes blazed. For justice? For doing what's right instead of what's convenient? Miss Whitmore, Elara, I've spent 3 years being the Duke my father wanted. The perfect aristocrat, making the perfect choices, living a perfect death disguised as life. Last night, for the first time since he died, I did something real, something that mattered, and I'm not going back. But, no buts. We fight this together, or we don't fight at all. And I choose to fight. Elara looked at this fierce, strange man who had shattered glass for her and was now prepared to shatter his entire world. She should argue, should insist he protect himself, should do the noble thing and sacrifice herself for his sake. But she was so tired of sacrificing, so tired of being quiet and invisible and erased. "Then we fight," she whispered. Adrian's smile was sharp as broken glass and just as dangerous. "Good, because they're about to discover that the Duke of Ironvale fights dirty when he's finally found something worth fighting for." Over the next 3 days, the scandal spread through society like wildfire through dead grass. By the second morning, Adrian's name was in every newspaper, some sympathetic, most scathing. The headlines screamed variations of the same story: Duke's midnight rescue or reckless abduction. Ironvale's glass-breaking scandal. Is the Duke mad or in love? Elara read them all in Adrian's library, her hands shaking as she turned page after page of speculation, innuendo, and outright lies. According to the papers, she was variously a scheming fortune hunter who had seduced the Duke, a mentally unstable girl prone to hysteria, or, most charitably, a naive, innocent being manipulated by forces beyond her understanding. Helena, meanwhile, played the grieving guardian to perfection. She gave interviews describing her heartbreak at Elara's confusion, and her hope that the poor girl would receive proper care. Beatrice appeared in society looking pale and tragic, whispering to anyone who would listen about how terrified she'd been when the Duke had exploded in rage at the ball. The Ashcrofts said nothing publicly, which was somehow more threatening than any statement. Lord Chancellor Ashcroft's silence hung over everything like a blade suspended by thread, ready to fall at any moment. "Stop reading that poison," Adrian said, plucking the newspaper from her hands. They sat in his study, a smaller, more intimate room than the library, with leather furniture and the smell of tobacco and old books. He'd been working through correspondence all morning, answering the flood of letters that had arrived since the scandal broke. "I need to know what they're saying," Elara protested. "Why? So you can absorb their judgment and start believing it?" He tossed the paper into the fire, where it curled and blackened. "The truth is simple. Helena tried to kill you, I stopped it, and now she's using every weapon she has to make you look like the villain. Knowing the details doesn't change those facts. But your reputation will survive or it won't." Adrian leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident in the lines around his eyes. He'd barely slept since the ball, spending his nights with Pembroke, going through every legal avenue, every possible strategy. "Either way, I'm not backing down." A knock interrupted them. Morrison entered, carrying a silver tray with a single envelope. "Your Grace, this just arrived, hand-delivered by Lord Chancellor Ashcroft's private secretary." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian took the envelope, studied the wax seal bearing the Ashcroft crest, then broke it open. His face remained impassive as he read, but Elara saw his knuckles whiten around the paper. "What does it say?" she asked when he finally lowered the letter. "The Lord Chancellor requests the pleasure of my company for dinner tomorrow night. Private. Just the two of us." Adrian's voice was carefully neutral. "To discuss matters of mutual concern. It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap." Adrian set the letter aside. "But refusing would be seen as cowardice or guilt. I have to go." "Then I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." Adrian's tone brooked no argument. "Ashcroft wants to corner me alone, probably with Marina conveniently present. He'll make his position clear. Marry his daughter and this all goes away, or refuse and face consequences I can't yet imagine. Having you there would only give him ammunition. So you're going to walk into his house alone and face whatever threats he's prepared?" Elara stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "That's not strategy, that's suicide." "It's necessary." Adrian rose as well, his height suddenly imposing. "Elara, I know you want to fight beside me, but this is my world. These are my battles to wage. Your job is to stay safe while Pembroke builds our legal case." "My job?" Elara's voice rose despite her effort to control it. "You're not my guardian yet, Adrian. You're not responsible for assigning me jobs." Something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or approval. "You're right. I apologize. But my point stands. Ashcroft is dangerous, and he plays games most people can't even recognize until they've already lost. Please, trust me to handle this." Elara wanted to argue further, but the look on Adrian's face stopped her. He wasn't being condescending or dismissive. He was genuinely afraid, not for himself, but for her. The realization hit her like cold water. "All right," she said quietly. "But if you're not back by midnight, I'm sending Morrison with half the household staff to drag you home." Adrian's laugh was startled and genuine. "Fair enough." The next evening, Elara paced the drawing room like a caged animal while Mrs. Rowan tried unsuccessfully to interest her in tea. Adrian had left an hour ago, dressed in formal evening wear, his face a mask of aristocratic composure. But Elara had seen the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had flexed and released as he'd climbed into the carriage. "He'll be fine, dear," Mrs. Rowan said, though she looked worried herself. "His Grace knows how to handle the Lord Chancellor." Does anyone really know how to handle a man with that much power? Elara stopped at the window, staring out at the darkening grounds. Snow had begun falling again, thick flakes that muffled the world in white silence. She was about to turn away when movement caught her eye. A carriage, not Adrian's, rolling up the drive with its lamps extinguished. Odd. Visitors normally announced themselves and certainly didn't arrive in darkness. "Mrs. Rowan, are we expecting anyone?" The housekeeper joined her at the window, frowning. Not that Morrison mentioned. Perhaps someone seeking shelter from the storm. But Elara's instincts, honed by 7 years of survival, screamed warning. She watched as the carriage stopped at the side entrance, the servant's door. Watched as a cloaked figure descended and was immediately admitted by someone from inside. "That's not right," she whispered. "Mrs. Rowan, where's Morrison?" I'm not sure. He mentioned checking the wine cellars earlier." Elara was already moving, gathering her skirts and running for the hallway. Mrs. Rowan called after her, but she didn't stop. Something was wrong. Deeply, dangerously wrong. She took the servants' stairs 2 at a time, emerging in a narrow corridor near the kitchen. Voices drifted from around the corner, low, urgent, conspiratorial. "Assured me the Duke would be gone all evening." That was Morrison's voice, but stripped of its usual deference. "You have perhaps 2 hours before anyone realizes what's happened. That's all I need." A woman's voice, cultured and cold. "Helena." Elara pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. What was Helena doing here, and why was Morrison helping her? "The girls' rooms?" Helena asked. "Second floor, east wing, but there are maids." "Paid off or dismissed, as we discussed. Lord Chancellor Ashcroft was very thorough in his instructions." Helena's voice dripped satisfaction. "By the time anyone realizes she's gone, she'll be safely installed in St. Mercy's Asylum, and the doctors there will testify to her obvious mental instability." Elara's blood turned to ice. St. Mercy's, she'd heard whispers about that place. Women went in and rarely came out, their families claiming they'd died of fever or melancholy. It was where inconvenient daughters and wives disappeared. "What about the Duke?" Morrison asked. "When he returns and finds her gone, he'll be informed that Miss Whitmore suffered a breakdown and had to be removed for her own safety. The magistrates have already signed the order. Lord Chancellor Ashcroft saw to that this afternoon. It's all perfectly legal." Helena laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "By the time Blackmore realizes he's been outmaneuvered, it will be too late. No Duke, no matter how powerful, can overturn a Lord Chancellor's direct order." Elara's mind raced. Adrian was at the Ashcrofts now, probably being fed wine and flattery and subtle threats while Helena executed the real plan. They'd split their forces, distract Adrian while eliminating the problem he was trying to protect. She had to run, had to hide, had to... No. Running would only delay the inevitable. Helena had the magistrates, the Lord Chancellor, and now Morrison. She had the law on her side, twisted though it was. Elara could hide in the castle for hours, or even days, but eventually they'd find her. And when they did, she'd have no witnesses, no proof, just her word against powerful people with signed documents. Unless, the idea formed with stunning clarity. Dangerous, audacious, probably doomed to fail. But it was the only chance she had. She turned and ran back the way she'd come, taking the stairs 3 at a time. Mrs. Rowan waited in the hallway, wringing her hands. "Miss Elara, what's—" "Morrison's betrayed us," Elara gasped. "Helena's here with magistrates' orders to take me to an asylum. I need your help." Mrs. Rowan's face went pale. But the Duke is exactly where they want him, too far away to help. Mrs. Rowan, please, do you trust me? The housekeeper studied her for a long moment. Then her face hardened with decision. Tell me what you need. 15 minutes later, Elara descended the main staircase dressed in her finest gown, one the modiste had delivered just that morning, deep midnight blue with silver embroidery. Her hair was swept up in an elegant arrangement, her face composed. She looked nothing like the terrified girl who'd frozen on a balcony, and everything like the daughter of wealth and privilege she'd been born to be. Helena waited in the entrance hall with Morrison and two men in official-looking coats, asylum attendants, no doubt. Her stepmother's face was a picture of false sympathy. "Elara, darling," Helena said, extending her hands. "I'm so glad you've come down willingly. This will be so much easier if you don't fight." "I have no intention of fighting," Elara said calmly. "I'm going to make this very easy for everyone." Helena blinked, obviously thrown by her composure. That's very mature of you. You'll see. St. Mercy's is a lovely facility. You'll receive the best care. I'm sure I would if I were going," Elara smiled. "But I'm not, because those orders you're holding are based on false pretenses, and I'm about to prove it in front of witnesses." "What witnesses?" One of the attendants looked around the empty hall nervously. "Them." Elara gestured to the doorways and corridors. At her signal, Mrs. Rowan emerged from the drawing room, followed by the head cook, 3 maids, the stable master, and half a dozen other household staff. All of them stepped into the hall, forming a semicircle around Helena and her men. Helena's composure cracked. "What is this?" "Witnesses," Elara repeated, "to the fact that I'm perfectly sane, perfectly coherent, and being abducted against my will on fraudulent charges." She turned to the attendants. "Gentlemen, what exactly do your orders say?" The men exchanged glances. One reluctantly produced a folded document. "That Miss Elara Whitmore is to be removed to St. Mercy's Asylum for evaluation, having demonstrated signs of severe mental disturbance, including hysteria, delusions, and violent tendencies." "Violent tendencies?" Elara laughed. "Do I look violent? Am I screaming, attacking anyone? Or am I standing here calmly explaining why your orders are based on lies?" "The Lord Chancellor himself signed this," the attendant said, but he sounded uncertain now. "Under false information provided by this woman." Elara pointed at Helena. "Information that anyone with eyes can see is untrue. Mrs. Rowan, do I seem hysterical to you?" "Not in the least, miss," the housekeeper said firmly. "Sound as a bell, you are." "And you, Thomas?" Elara addressed the stable master. "Have you witnessed any delusions or violent behavior?" "No, Miss Whitmore. You've been nothing but kind and reasonable." One by one, the servants spoke up, testifying to Elara's sanity and composure. The attendants looked increasingly uncomfortable. This wasn't how these things usually went. Most women they collected were already drugged or restrained, certainly not standing in a hallway with a dozen witnesses vouching for their sanity. "This is absurd." Helena's voice rose, shrill with panic. "These are servants, paid to say whatever their employer wants." "I'm not their employer," Elara interrupted. "The Duke of Ironvale is, and he's not here. These people are speaking of their own free will, which is more than can be said for the magistrates who signed your fraudulent orders." Morrison stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "Miss Whitmore, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. The Lord Chancellor's orders are legal and binding." "Then let's test that in court," Elara said. "I formally request a hearing before an independent magistrate to contest these orders. That's my legal right, isn't it?" The attendants looked at each other. It was, in fact, her right. Anyone being committed could request a hearing, though most were too drugged or broken to do so. But Elara was neither, and now she had witnesses to the fact that she'd made the request clearly and coherently. "This will take days," Helena hissed, "and in the meantime, she stays in the Duke's custody, continuing to poison his mind against her own family." "Or I stay in neutral custody," Elara said. "There are convents that take in women awaiting legal proceedings, aren't there? Places where I'd be safe from both my stepmother and the Duke's influence?" It was a gamble. If they agreed, she'd be separated from the only protection she had. But if they refused, it would prove this wasn't about her safety at all. It was about silencing her. The attendants conferred in whispers. Finally, one turned back to her. The convent of St. Catherine accepts such cases. If you agree to stay there until the hearing— Done, Elara said before Helena could object. When can we arrange transport? Now, wait just a moment, Helena began. Unless you have a reason to object to a neutral religious institution? Elara raised an eyebrow. Surely you're not afraid of an independent hearing if your claims are true. Helena's face went purple with rage, but she was trapped. Objecting would reveal her real motives, and the servants were watching everything, ready to testify if needed. Fine, she spat. The convent. But when the hearing proves you're unstable, don't expect mercy. I don't expect mercy from you, Elara said quietly. I never have. An hour later, Elara sat in a plain carriage rolling through snowy streets toward the convent of St. Catherine. Mrs. Rowan had packed a small bag for her, pressing a note into her hands. For His Grace, when he returns, I'll make sure he gets it. The note explained everything. Helena's ambush, Morrison's betrayal, the asylum orders, and Elara's choice to request a hearing from neutral territory. She'd also written something else, words that had poured out of her in a rush. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I'm fighting the only way I can, by forcing them to face me in open court where lies are harder to sustain than in shadowy rooms with signed papers. Thank you for showing me that fighting is possible. Whatever happens, you gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The courage to stand. The convent was ancient stone and quiet gardens, peaceful despite the late hour. The Mother Superior, a woman with steel-gray hair and kind eyes, greeted Elara with neither judgment nor pity. We offer sanctuary to those who seek it, no questions asked. You'll have a room, simple but clean, and the freedom of the grounds within our walls. No one, not family, not officials, may remove you without your consent or a direct order from the crown itself. Thank you, Elara whispered. We'll speak more tomorrow, the Mother Superior said. For now, rest. You look as though you've been fighting a war. I have been, Elara said, and it's not over yet. She was shown to a small cell with white walls, a narrow bed, and a window overlooking the garden. After the luxury of Ironvale, it should have felt like a prison. Instead, it felt like the first safe breath she'd taken in years. She'd just changed into the plain nightgown the sisters had provided when she heard raised voices from below. Male voices, angry and insistent. Then boots on stone stairs, moving fast. The door burst open. Adrian stood there, wild-eyed and breathing hard, still in his evening clothes but disheveled as if he'd run the entire way from the Ashcrofts. Snow dusted his shoulders. Behind him, the Mother Superior protested the intrusion, but he wasn't listening. You're safe, he said, the words half prayer, half accusation. You're actually safe. Of course I'm safe. Elara rose from the bed. Did you think I'd let them take me without a fight? I thought, when I came home and Morrison told me, Adrian stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I thought I'd lost you, that while I was drinking wine and playing diplomatic games, they'd stolen you away and I'd never see you again. I'm harder to steal than they thought, Elara said quietly, and smarter than they gave me credit for. Adrian crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She could feel his heart racing against her cheek, smell snow and night air, and something purely him. Don't ever do that again, he said into her hair. Don't walk into danger alone without what? Without you? Elara pulled back just enough to see his face. You were the one walking into danger alone tonight. Did Ashcroft make his position clear? Adrian's expression darkened. Crystal clear. Marry Marina within the month, drop all charges against Helena, and return you to her custody, or face ruin. He has enough influence to destroy my business interest, poison every social connection I have, and ensure the magistrates find you guilty of mental instability regardless of evidence. So we're finished, Elara said. The words hurt more than she'd expected. No. Adrian's grip on her shoulders tightened. I told him to go to hell. Elara's breath caught. Adrian, you can't. He'll do exactly what he threatened. Let him try. Adrian's eyes blazed with that same fierce intensity she'd seen the night he shattered the glass doors. I've spent 3 years being the perfect Duke, making the perfect compromises, living half a life because I was afraid of losing approval from people I don't even respect. I'm done with that. If defending you cost me everything, then everything wasn't worth keeping. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Elara, you stood on that balcony knowing you might die, and you didn't beg. Tonight, you faced down asylum orders with nothing but your wits and your courage, and you won. You're the bravest person I've ever met, and I'll be damned if I let Ashcroft or Helena or anyone else break you. But your reputation will survive or it won't. Either way, I can live with myself. His voice dropped to something raw and honest. What I can't live with is becoming the kind of man who sacrifices others to protect his own comfort. I won't become my father. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning Elara didn't fully understand. But before she could ask, the Mother Superior cleared her throat from the doorway. Your Grace, I must insist on propriety. Miss Whitmore is under our protection, and that means no male visitors in her chambers, Duke or otherwise. Adrian released Elara reluctantly, stepping back. Of course. My apologies, Mother Superior. I only needed to ensure that she was safe. Yes, I gathered as much from your dramatic entrance. The older woman's eyes twinkled despite her stern tone. She is safe, Your Grace. The question is whether the same can be said for you. What do you mean? Elara asked. The Mother Superior's expression turned grave. There are men at our gates, the Lord Chancellor's men, by their livery. They claim to have a warrant for Miss Whitmore's immediate removal, signed by the Crown Seal itself. Elara's stomach dropped. The Crown Seal. That was beyond anything Lord Chancellor Ashcroft should be able to obtain unless he called in every favor he had, Adrian said grimly, reading her expression. I pushed him too far tonight. This is his answer. Can they enter a convent? Elara asked the Mother Superior. With the Crown's seal? Yes. Our sanctuary extends only to civil matters. A royal warrant supersedes our authority. The older woman looked between them. I can delay them, demand to see the warrant, verify its authenticity, request time to consult with our legal advisors. But if it's genuine, I cannot refuse. An hour, perhaps 2 at most. 2 hours. After that, Elara would be dragged to St. Mercy's, and no amount of witnesses or hearings would save her. With a royal warrant, they could hold her indefinitely without trial. There has to be something we can do, Elara said desperately. Some legal recourse. There is one. Adrian's voice was strange, distant, but it requires a choice you may not want to make. What choice? Adrian looked at her, and Elara saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not just determination or anger, but fear. Raw, vulnerable fear. Marry me, he said. Tonight. Right now. The world seemed to tilt. What? If you're my wife, they can't take you. A husband's authority supersedes a guardian's, and even the Lord Chancellor can't force a married woman into an asylum without her husband's consent. Adrian was speaking fast now, the words tumbling out. The Mother Superior can perform the ceremony. Convents have that authority in emergencies. It would be legal, binding, and immediate. You want to marry me to save me from an asylum? Elara's voice came out hollow. That's insane. It's the only option we have left. Adrian moved closer, his hands finding hers. Elara, I know this isn't what you imagined. I know it's rushed and desperate, and probably the worst proposal in history, but in 2 hours they'll take you, and I'll lose any power to protect you. Please, let me do this. Elara's mind raced. Marriage. Real, legal marriage to a duke she'd known for less than a week. It would solve the immediate problem, yes, but it would also bind her to him forever, make her dependent on his protection, his goodwill, his choices. She'd spent 7 years escaping one prison only to potentially walk into another. But what choice did she have? St. Mercy's was a death sentence by another name. And Adrian, whatever else he was, he'd proven himself willing to fight for her, to sacrifice for her, to see her as a person rather than a problem. If I say yes, she said slowly, I need to know this isn't just about protection. I need to know you're not doing this out of guilt or obligation, or I'm doing it because the thought of losing you makes me want to tear the world apart, Adrian interrupted. His voice was rough with emotion. I'm doing it because when I thought they'd taken you tonight, I realized I haven't felt this alive since before my father died. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me want to fight instead of compromise. And yes, I want to protect you, but I also want— He stopped, swallowed hard. I want to know you. To have time to discover who you are when you're not just surviving. To see if this thing between us, this recognition, this connection, is real, or just two lonely people finding each other in the dark. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was madness. This was the most impulsive, dangerous decision she could possibly make. And yet, looking into Adrian's storm-gray eyes, she found herself nodding. All right, she whispered. Ask me properly. Adrian dropped to one knee on the cold stone floor. His hand still held hers, warm and solid and real. Elara Whitmore, will you marry me? Not for protection, not for convenience, but because I think we might save each other if we're brave enough to try. Yes, Elara said. I'll marry you. The Mother Superior, who'd been watching from the doorway, sighed. Well then, I suppose I'd better fetch the holy water and find 2 witnesses who won't faint from shock. Your Grace, I hope you know what you're doing. I don't, Adrian said honestly, rising to his feet. But I'm doing it anyway. 20 minutes later, in the convent's small chapel lit only by candles, Elara Whitmore married Adrian Blackmore with 2 elderly nuns as witnesses, and the sound of men pounding on the gates in the distance. The ceremony was brief, the words ancient and binding. When the Mother Superior pronounced them married, Adrian kissed her, a gentle press of lips that still managed to feel like a promise and a question all at once. You're stuck with me now, Elara whispered against his mouth. Good, Adrian said. I intend to be stuck with you for a very long time. They emerged from the chapel to find the Mother Superior waiting with news. The men at the gates have withdrawn. Apparently word reached them of the marriage, and without grounds to remove you, they had no authority to enter. They'll be back, Adrian said, with new strategies, new attacks. This won't end here. No, Elara agreed, but now we face it together. She expected to feel trapped, or frightened, or uncertain. Instead, standing in the quiet convent with her hand in Adrian's, she felt something unexpected. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, but undeniably real. They'd married to survive, but maybe, just maybe, they'd given themselves the chance to do more than that. Maybe they'd given themselves the chance to actually live. Outside, snow continued to fall over the city, covering everything in white. And at the Ashcroft mansion, Lord Chancellor Ashcroft received word of the marriage with a smile that promised terrible things. His daughter Marina stood beside him, her beautiful face twisted with fury. He chose that nothing girl over me? She hissed. He chose his own destruction, Ashcroft corrected. Now we simply accelerate it. Send word to our contacts. I want everything, every debt, every secret, every weakness the Blackmore family has ever had. If the Duke wants war, we'll give him one he cannot possibly win. And in Helena Whitmore's house across the city, Beatrice brought news of the marriage to her mother. Helena sat in silence for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she smiled, a cold, calculating smile that would have terrified anyone who knew her well. Perfect, she said softly. Absolutely perfect. Mother? Beatrice looked confused. How is this perfect? He's married her. We can't touch her now. Can't we? Helena rose, moving to her desk where documents lay scattered. The marriage was hasty, performed in secret in a convent. That raises questions about consent, about mental competency, about whether the girl was coerced, and if the marriage can be annulled. She tapped one document, a letter bearing an official seal. Then everything returns to my custody, including Elara's inheritance. But how? Leave that to me, darling. Helena's smile widened. The Duke thinks he's won by marrying her. What he doesn't realize is that he's just given us exactly the weapon we need to destroy them both. The carriage ride back to Ironvale Castle felt surreal. Elara sat beside her husband, watching snow fall past the windows while her mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened. She'd gone from invisible servant to duchess in less than a week, and the weight of that transformation pressed down on her like physical force. Adrian sat across from her, not touching her, giving her space to process, but his eyes never left her face, watching for signs of panic or regret. "Say something," he finally murmured. "Even if it's that you've made a terrible mistake and want it annulled immediately." "I was just thinking," Elara said slowly, "that Helena is probably celebrating right now. She thinks the marriage gives her ammunition to destroy us." "She's not wrong." Adrian's voice was grim. "A hasty marriage performed in secret, with you technically still under her guardianship. She'll claim I coerced you, that you weren't in your right mind, that the whole thing should be invalidated. Can she do that? With Ashcroft's backing? Maybe. It would require a church tribunal, testimony from both of us, probably an investigation into our relationship." He said the last word carefully, as if testing its weight. "They'll ask invasive questions. Examine every moment we've spent together. Look for any evidence that this wasn't entered into freely." "But it was," Elara said. "I chose this. You asked, and I said yes. Under duress, with men at the gates ready to drag you to an asylum." Adrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Elara, I need you to understand what we're facing. They're going to paint me as a predator who took advantage of a vulnerable girl. You as either my victim or my accomplice. The truth, that we married to protect you from illegal imprisonment, won't matter as much as the story they can sell." "Then we sell a better story." Elara met his eyes steadily. "We show them a marriage based on genuine connection, even if that connection only has a few days of history. We prove that I'm mentally sound, capable of making my own choices, and that those choices led me to you." "How do we prove something that's barely existed long enough to be real?" Adrian asked, but there was hope in his voice, fragile and cautious. "We make it real," Elara said simply. "We stop treating this as a strategy and start treating it as what it actually is. A marriage between two people who saw something in each other worth fighting for." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. His palm was warm, calloused in unexpected places. "You're remarkably practical for someone whose life just got turned completely upside down." "I've had practice." Elara squeezed his fingers. 7 years of practice adapting to impossible situations. This is just a different kind of impossible. They arrived at Ironvale to find chaos. News of the marriage had beaten them home, and the entrance hall was filled with servants in varying states of shock, excitement, or concern. Mrs. Rowan rushed forward, her face torn between joy and worry. Your Grace's, I should say, congratulations." She stopped, flustered. "Though I suppose under the circumstances—" "Thank you, Mrs. Rowan," Elara said, trying to inject some normalcy into her voice. "I know this is sudden." "Sudden!" The housekeeper laughed, slightly hysterical. Your Grace, you've gone from guest to duchess in the time it takes most people to eat dinner. Morrison's fled, by the way, took his things and disappeared the moment word arrived of the marriage. His Grace's solicitor is in the study waiting to speak with you both, and there are 7 different messengers in the kitchen with letters that arrived in the last hour." "Let me guess," Adrian said. "Congratulations from our friends, condemnation from our enemies, and subpoenas from Ashcroft's lawyers?" "All 3, Your Grace," Adrian sighed. "Send Pembroke to the study. Tell the messengers we'll respond by morning. And Mrs. Rowan, thank you for helping Miss Whitmore. Her Grace, tonight. Your loyalty won't be forgotten." The housekeeper's eyes misted. "She reminded us what it means to fight for what's right, Your Grace. We should be thanking her." As the servants dispersed, Adrian and Elara climbed the stairs toward the study. Halfway up, Elara stopped. "Adrian, wait. Before we face Pembroke and all the legal complications, I need to know something." He turned, searching her face. "What? Do you regret it? The marriage?" "No." His answer was immediate, certain. "Do you?" "No," Elara said. "But I'm afraid I'll become another obligation, another weight you're carrying out of duty rather than choice." Adrian descended 1 step, bringing them eye to eye. "Elara, I've spent my entire adult life drowning in obligations I never chose. My title, my estates, the expectations of society, all of it was inherited, forced on me by accident of birth. You're the first thing I've chosen for myself in 3 years, the first real decision I've made that wasn't about preserving the past or meeting someone else's standards. So no, you're not an obligation, you're the opposite of one. The words settled something in Elara's chest, easing a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged. All right, then let's go face whatever comes next, together. Pembroke waited in the study, surrounded by documents and looking like he hadn't slept in days. When they entered, he stood quickly, his eyes widening as he took in their joined hands. So it's true, he said. You actually married. We did. Adrian moved to his desk, pulling Elara with him. What's the legal damage? Pembroke didn't sugarcoat it. Significant. Lord Chancellor Ashcroft filed a petition with the church tribunal within an hour of learning about the marriage. He's claiming mental incompetence on Her Grace's part, coercion on yours, and improper procedure. He wants the marriage annulled and Her Grace remanded to her guardian's custody pending psychiatric evaluation. Of course he does, Elara muttered. There's more. Pembroke pulled out another document. Elara Whitmore has filed a separate petition claiming fraud. She alleges that you married Her Grace specifically to gain control of her inheritance, that the entire rescue at the ball was staged to make you look heroic, and that you've been manipulating her since the moment you carried her inside. Adrian's laugh was bitter. Manipulation. That's rich coming from a woman who tried to freeze her stepdaughter to death. Unfortunately, she has witnesses who'll swear Miss Beatrice's version, that the balcony door stuck accidentally, that Mrs. Whitmore was devastated by the incident, that your Grace overreacted violently. Pembroke paused. She's also produced medical records claiming Her Grace has a history of nervous instability requiring special care. That's a lie, Elara said sharply. I've never seen a doctor for anything except childhood illnesses. The records are signed by a Dr. Carstairs, very respected. Apparently treated you several times over the past 2 years for episodes of hysteria and delusion. I've never met anyone named Carstairs. Elara's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. Helena's created false documents. I know, Pembroke said gently. And we'll prove it. But it takes time to discredit a respected physician, especially when he's willing to testify under oath. In the meantime, these records give Ashcroft's petition legitimacy. Adrian slammed his palm on the desk. So what do? We can't just wait while they build their case. Every day we don't fight back is a day they use to entrench their lies. We fight on multiple fronts, Pembroke said. He spread documents across the desk. First, we file counter-petitions. Her Grace makes a formal statement, witnessed and notarized, attesting to her full mental competency and free choice in the marriage. Second, we investigate Dr. Carstairs. If Helena bribed him to create false records, we find proof. Third, we go after the original problem, Helena's theft of the inheritance. If we can prove she's been embezzling funds, it undermines her credibility as a guardian. How long will all this take? Elara asked. Weeks? Maybe months. Pembroke's expression was apologetic. I know it's not what you want to hear, but legal battles move slowly, especially when your opponents have the Lord Chancellor's backing. We don't have months, Adrian said. Every day this drags on, the scandal grows. My business partners are already sending worried letters. 3 invitations were withdrawn today alone. If this continues, we'll be social pariahs before spring. Then we need to change the battlefield, Elara said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. She stood straighter, an idea forming. They're fighting us in courts and tribunals where they have influence. We need to fight where we have the advantage. Which is where? Pembroke asked. Public opinion. Elara moved to the desk, looking at the scattered documents. Helena's story works because it's simple and fits their prejudices. Vulnerable girl, predatory duke. But what if we tell our own story? The real one. What if instead of hiding while lawyers argue, we go public? With what? Adrian looked skeptical. Our version of events? They'll just call it self-serving. Not if we have proof. Elara's mind raced, pieces clicking together. The ball. There were hundreds of witnesses, people who saw me locked outside, who watched you break the glass. Some of them must have been disturbed by what happened, must have questions about Helena's version. What if we found them, got their statements? Pembroke's eyes widened. That could work. Eyewitness testimony from neutral parties would be powerful. But who would talk to us? Adrian asked. Most of those guests are terrified of Ashcroft. They won't risk his anger by supporting us. Not all of them, Elara said. There were younger people there, second sons and daughters who don't have as much to lose. People who might actually care about truth over politics, and she stopped, an idea striking her. The servants, the castle staff who worked the ball, they saw everything, and they're not bound by social obligations. Servants' testimony is worth less in court, Pembroke warned. But it's worth plenty in the court of public opinion, Elara countered. If we can get enough people, nobles and servants, young and old, all telling the same story, it becomes impossible to dismiss. Adrian stared at her with something like wonder. You want to wage a campaign, not just a legal battle, but a social one. I want to make them face what they did, Elara said. Helena locked me outside to die, then tried to have me imprisoned when that failed. Ashcroft backed her because it suited his political goals. They're counting on everyone being too polite or too afraid to call them out. So let's stop being polite. For the first time since they'd entered the study, Pembroke smiled. Your Grace, I think you might be more dangerous than your husband. I certainly hope so, Elara said. Now, where do we start? They started with the servants. Over the next 3 days, Pembroke quietly interviewed every staff member who'd worked the ball. Their testimony was damning. Maids described seeing Beatrice leave the balcony doors with a key in her hand. Footmen recalled Helena's satisfied smile when she'd noticed Elara missing. The head butler remembered Adrian's fury and the specific words he'd used when demanding the key. But servants weren't enough. They needed members of society willing to speak truth against power, and that proved harder. Adrian sent carefully worded letters to every younger noble he knew, second sons, daughters with limited prospects, anyone who might value justice over political advantage. Most went unanswered. 3 sent polite refusals. 1 sent a letter warning them to stop before they destroyed themselves. Then, on the 4th day, an unexpected visitor arrived. Lady Catherine Hartwell was 23, unmarried, and furiously angry. She swept into Adrian's study without waiting to be announced, her brown eyes blazing. I was there, she said without preamble, at the ball. I saw what happened to Miss Whitmore, to her Grace, and I've been sick about it ever since. Elara, who'd been helping Pembroke organize testimony, looked up in surprise. Lady Catherine? We've never been introduced, but I remember you from when we were children, before your father remarried. Catherine pulled off her gloves with sharp movements. My mother forbade me to speak about the ball, said it wasn't our concern, that the Ashcrofts knew best. But I can't stay silent while they call you insane and claim His Grace coerced you. I saw you on that balcony. I saw you standing there, freezing, while everyone danced. I tried to get someone's attention, but the music was too loud and her voice cracked. I should have done more. You're doing it now, Elara said gently. That's what matters. Catherine nodded, composing herself. I'll testify. In court, in public, wherever you need, and I can get others. My brother, Lord Thomas Hartwell, was there too. He's not afraid of Ashcroft. And there's Miss Louisa Crane. She's engaged to one of the Duke of Somerset's sons, which gives her some protection. I think she'd speak up if she knew others were willing. Lady Catherine, Adrian said, you understand what this will cost you. Ashcroft will ensure you're punished for supporting us. Let him try. Catherine's chin lifted. I'm a 3rd daughter with a modest dowry. The worst he can do is ensure I never marry well. And frankly, if speaking the truth costs me a husband who'd rather I stayed silent, then I don't want that husband anyway. Over the next week, Catherine proved as good as her word. She brought her brother, who testified to seeing Beatrice lock the doors and walk away smiling. She brought Miss Crane, who described the shocked whispers when Adrian smashed the glass. She even brought an elderly dowager who'd been friends with Elara's mother and was outraged by what Helena had done. The tide was beginning to turn. Newspapers that had condemned the marriage started running counterpoint articles, questioning Helena's version of events. Society matrons who'd initially sided with Ashcroft began to reconsider when faced with multiple witnesses saying the same thing. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elara was in the library, reading through depositions when Mrs. Rowan entered with a visitor, a thin, nervous man in his 50s clutching a leather case. Your Grace, this is Mr. Edmund Porter. He says he was your father's solicitor. Elara's heart skipped. I remember you. You read the will after father died. Porter nodded, his hands shaking slightly. I did, Your Grace, and I've regretted it every day since. He set the case on the table and opened it, revealing stacks of documents. I've come to confess, and to give you these. Confess what? Elara moved closer, afraid to hope. That I helped Mrs. Whitmore steal your inheritance. Porter's voice was thick with shame. Your father's will was clear. Everything was to be held in trust for you until age 21, with a reputable banking firm as trustee. Helena was to have a generous settlement but no control over your funds. I altered the documents after his death, making it appear that Helena was the appointed trustee. The room seemed to tilt. Why would you do that? Money. Porter couldn't meet her eyes. Helena paid me, and she threatened to expose certain indiscretions in my past if I refused. I told myself you were just a child, that you'd never know the difference. But watching what she did to you, how she treated you... He stopped, swallowing hard. I can't live with it anymore. These are the original documents, the real will, showing the true trustee. Bank statements proving Helena's been siphoning funds. Correspondence between us detailing the fraud. Elara's hands shook as she picked up her father's will, seeing his signature, his careful provisions for her future. All of it stolen by Helena's greed and this man's weakness. Why now? She asked. Why come forward after all these years? Because you fought back. Porter looked at her finally, his eyes red. I saw what happened at the ball. Read about the marriage, the legal battles. You could have stayed silent, stayed invisible like she wanted. But you didn't. You stood up and demanded justice. It made me realize that if a girl who'd lost everything could find the courage to fight, maybe I could find the courage to tell the truth. Adrian, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. Mr. Porter, you understand this is a confession to multiple crimes? You'll face legal consequences. I know. Porter straightened slightly. I'm prepared to testify in any proceeding, civil or criminal. I'll face whatever punishment comes. It's long overdue. Pembroke, summoned by a servant, arrived and immediately began examining the documents. His expression shifted from skepticism to shock to fierce satisfaction. This is it, he breathed. This proves everything. The fraud, the theft, Helena's entire scheme. It's all here. Can we use it? Elara asked. To stop the annulment petition? Better than that, Pembroke said. We can use it to destroy her. With this evidence, we file criminal charges. Fraud, forgery, theft. Helena could go to prison. And Ashcroft... He smiled grimly. Ashcroft has been backing her publicly. If she goes down as a criminal, he goes down with her for supporting a fraud. He'll fight back, Adrian warned. This will make him desperate. Good, Elara said. The word surprised her with its vehemence. Let him be desperate. Let them all be desperate. They've had power for too long, used it to hurt too many people. It's time someone fought back. The next morning, they made their move. Pembroke filed formal criminal charges against Helena Whitmore, attaching Porter's confession and supporting documents. Simultaneously, Catherine Hartwell arranged for a dozen witnesses to give statements to sympathetic newspapers, describing what they'd seen at the ball. The scandal exploded. Within hours, Helena's house was surrounded by constables with a warrant for her arrest. She emerged in tears, playing the persecuted widow, but the crowd that had gathered wasn't sympathetic. Too many people had read the witness statements, seen the evidence of her fraud. She tried to kill that poor girl, someone shouted. Thief, called another. Stole from her own stepdaughter. Helena's face went white with rage and fear as the constables led her to a waiting carriage. Beatrice followed, screaming about injustice and persecution, but no one was listening anymore. At the Ashcroft mansion, the Lord Chancellor read reports of Helena's arrest with a face like stone. Marina stood beside him, her beauty marred by ugly fury. We could still stop this, she said. Use your influence with the magistrates. And tie myself even closer to a woman who's about to be convicted of fraud? Ashcroft shook his head. No, we cut our losses. Helena was useful, but she's become a liability. But the Duke, he's humiliated me. Married that nothing girl instead of... That nothing girl just outmaneuvered one of the best political minds in the kingdom, Ashcroft said quietly. I underestimated her. I won't make that mistake again. So we just let them win? We retreat, for now. Ashcroft's eyes were cold. But Her Grace should remember that battles are won and lost quickly. Wars take years, and I'm very patient. At Ironvale, Elara stood at the window of what was now officially her bedroom, the Duchess's chambers, connected to Adrian's by an adjoining door that remained carefully closed. She watched snow fall over the grounds and tried to process that Helena was actually in custody, that the nightmare might finally be ending. A knock at the door. "Come in," she called. Adrian entered carrying 2 glasses of wine. "I thought we should celebrate, or at least acknowledge that we've survived another day." Elara accepted a glass. "Pembroke thinks Helena will be convicted. The evidence is too strong. Which means your inheritance will be restored. You'll be independently wealthy, free to make your own choices." Adrian paused. "Including choices about this marriage." Elara turned to face him fully. "What are you saying?" "That you married me under duress, to escape imprisonment. Now that threat is gone. If you want an annulment, a real one, not Helena's version, I won't fight it. You'd be free, wealthy, able to start over however you want." The offer should have been tempting. A week ago, Elara would have taken it without hesitation. Freedom, independence, escape from obligation. But now, looking at Adrian's carefully neutral expression, she realized she didn't want freedom from him. She wanted freedom with him. "Do you want an annulment?" she asked. "No." His answer was immediate. "But what I want doesn't matter as much as what's right. You deserve a choice made freely, not under the shadow of asylum threats and legal battles." "Then here's my free choice," Elara said. She set down her wine and crossed to him, taking both his hands in hers. "I choose to stay. Not because I have to, not because you rescued me, but because I want to. Because when I imagine my future, you're in it. Because you're the first person in 7 years who made me feel like I was worth fighting for." Adrian's breath caught. "Elara, I know it's fast, I know we barely know each other, but we have time now, time to actually build something real. Unless," doubt crept in, "unless you were offering the annulment because you've changed your mind about wanting—" He kissed her. Not the gentle, ceremonial kiss from their wedding, but something fierce and desperate and real. His hands cupped her face, fingers tangling in her hair, and Elara felt something inside her chest crack open and bloom. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I haven't changed my mind. I want this. I want you. I just needed to know you wanted it too, freely chosen." "I do," Elara whispered. "Freely chosen. Completely certain." They stood there in the quiet room, holding each other as snow continued to fall outside. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Helena would still face trial. Ashcroft would still be watching for weakness. Society would still whisper about the scandalous marriage. But for the first time in 7 years, Elara felt like she was standing on solid ground. 3 weeks later, the church tribunal dismissed Ashcroft's petition for annulment. The weight of evidence, witness testimony, the revelation of Helena's fraud, statements from doctors affirming Elara's mental competence, was simply too much to overcome. The marriage was declared valid and binding. That same week, Elara Whitmore was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and theft. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, her assets seized to repay what she'd stolen. Beatrice, facing social ruin, fled to the continent with what money she'd managed to hide. And in the ballroom at Ironvale Castle, craftsmen carefully set silver into the cracks in the marble floor where glass had shattered, turning damage into art, scars into beauty. Elara watched them work, Adrian beside her, their hands intertwined. "Are you sure about the ball?" he asked. "We don't have to make a public statement like this." "Yes, we do," Elara said. "This is where it started, where you saw me, where everything changed. We should show them that we're not hiding, not ashamed. We should show them what happens when someone refuses to stay invisible." Adrian smiled, that sharp, dangerous smile she'd come to love. "Then we'll throw the best ball this castle has ever seen. And when they walk across that floor, across those silver lines, they'll remember what it cost to break the glass, and what we won because of it." "We haven't won yet," Elara reminded him. Ashcroft is still out there, and there will be others who resent what we represent. Let them resent us. Adrian pulled her closer. We'll face them together. The girl who refused to beg and the Duke who was tired of compromise. They won't know what hit them. Elara laughed, the sound bright and free. For so long, laughter had been something she'd forgotten how to do. But standing here in the ballroom where she'd nearly died, transformed now into the woman she was always meant to be, she felt it bubbling up from somewhere deep and irrepressible. Together, she agreed. Always together. And outside, society began to whisper, not of scandal anymore, but of something else. Of the Duchess of Ironvale, who'd risen from nothing, who'd fought power with courage and won. Of the Duke who'd chosen love over politics and somehow emerged stronger for it. The girl no one saw had become the woman everyone noticed, and she was just getting started. The invitations went out 6 weeks later, each one hand-addressed in silver ink on midnight blue paper. The message was simple. The Duke and Duchess of Ironvale request the honor of your presence at a winter ball to celebrate their marriage. No apologies, no explanations, just a statement of fact that dared society to respond. The responses came swiftly. Some declined with transparent excuses. Others accepted with carefully neutral language. But most, surprisingly most, accepted with genuine warmth, curious to see the couple who'd survived a scandal that should have destroyed them. 200 acceptances, Pembroke reported, scanning the latest batch of replies. That's more than your father's balls ever drew, Your Grace. Adrian looked up from the seating chart spread across his desk. They're coming to gawk, to see if we're as damaged as the rumors suggest, or if we've somehow managed to salvage respectability. Let them gawk, Elara said from her position by the window. She'd been watching the ballroom preparations all morning. Servants polishing chandeliers, arranging flowers, testing the orchestra's acoustics. They'll see exactly what we want them to see. Which is? Pembroke asked. Elara turned, and both men were struck by the transformation 6 weeks had wrought. She stood taller now, moved with quiet confidence rather than the careful invisibility she'd once cultivated. She wore a day dress of deep green that actually fit her properly, and her hair was swept up in a style that emphasized her fine bone structure rather than hiding it. But more than the external changes, something in her eyes had shifted, a light that no amount of suffering had managed to extinguish. That we're not ashamed, she said simply. That we made choices we stand by, and we're not apologizing for surviving. The night of the ball arrived with fresh snow and cold so sharp it turned breath to ice. Inside Ironvale Castle, every candle was lit, every surface gleamed, and the ballroom, with its silver-traced scars in the marble floor, waited like a stage set for the final act of a play no one had expected. Elara stood in the Duchess's chambers, watching her reflection while Mrs. Rowan and 2 maids made final adjustments to her gown. It was a masterpiece in midnight blue silk, the color of the invitations, the color of winter night. The bodice was fitted with silver embroidery that caught the light with every breath, and the skirt fell in layers of silk and tulle that whispered when she moved. Her hair was dressed with silver pins shaped like stars, and at her throat hung a necklace that had belonged to Adrian's mother, diamonds and sapphires that blazed with cold fire. She looked like a duchess. She felt like an imposter playing dress-up. But she'd learned that sometimes you had to play the part until it became real. You look beautiful, Your Grace, Mrs. Rowan said softly, stepping back to admire her work. Like you were born to wear that crown. I wasn't, Elara said. Then, meeting the housekeeper's eyes in the mirror, but I'm learning. A knock at the connecting door. May I come in? Adrian's voice. Yes. He entered, and Elara's breath caught. She'd seen him in formal wear before, but tonight he'd chosen midnight blue to match her gown, with silver embroidery at the collar and cuffs. They looked like they belonged together, 2 halves of a matching set. I wanted to give you this before we go down, he said, producing a small velvet box. It was my grandmother's. She was formidable. I think she would have liked you. Inside the box lay a ring, not the simple wedding band she wore, but a duchess's ring, sapphire surrounded by diamonds. Adrian slipped it onto her finger beside the wedding band, his hand steady even though she could see the tension in his shoulders. How are you feeling? She asked quietly. Terrified, he admitted. This is the first time I've hosted a major event since my father died. The first time I'm presenting myself to society as something other than what he raised me to be. And what did he raise you to be? Perfect, controlled, acceptable to everyone. Adrian's jaw tightened. A duke who never made waves, never challenged the established order, never questioned whether the way things were was the way they should be. You're not that duke anymore, Elara said. No, thanks to you. He cupped her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Ready to face them? Only if you are. They descended the grand staircase together as the first guests began to arrive. Elara felt every eye on them, heard the whispers that died when they drew close and resumed when they passed. But she kept her spine straight, her hand steady in Adrian's, her smile composed. Lady Catherine Hartwell was among the first to arrive, resplendent in rose silk and looking fiercely proud. Your Graces, she said, curtsying deeply. Thank you for including me. Half of society thinks I'm mad for supporting you, you know. Only half, Adrian smiled. We'll have to work harder. Catherine laughed. The other half is here tonight, trying to decide which side to land on. Give them a good show. As the ballroom filled, Elara recognized faces from that terrible night weeks ago. There was the woman in purple who'd simpered at Adrian, Lady Ashcroft, looking uncomfortable without her daughter. There were the young men who'd laughed when Beatrice mocked her, the dowagers who'd turned away when she'd stood alone by the wall. Now they all bowed to her, called her Your Grace, offered congratulations on her marriage with varying degrees of sincerity. And there, entering fashionably late, were Lord Chancellor Ashcroft and Marina. The crowd parted for them, conversations faltering. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the confrontation between the Duke who'd defied Ashcroft's wishes and the man who'd tried to destroy him for it. Ashcroft approached with Marina on his arm, his face a mask of aristocratic pleasantness. Your Graces, thank you for the invitation. We weren't sure we'd be welcome. Everyone is welcome who comes in good faith, Adrian said evenly, though I confess I'm surprised you chose to attend. I may not approve of how your marriage came about, Ashcroft said, but the church has validated it, and I'm not fool enough to continue a fight that's already lost. Besides, his eyes flicked to Elara, assessing. I'm curious about the young woman who managed to outmaneuver one of Elara Whitmore's schemes. That takes remarkable intelligence. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and in this world, that mattered. Marina, however, looked like she'd swallowed glass. Your Grace, she said to Elara, the title clearly painful in her mouth. How fortunate for you. Everything worked out so perfectly. Not perfectly, Elara said calmly, but well enough. I hope you find similar happiness, Miss Ashcroft. The barb was delicate but unmistakable. Marina was still unmarried while Elara wore a duchess's crown. Marina's smile turned brittle. I'm sure I shall. Eventually. As the Ashcrofts moved away, Catherine appeared at Elara's elbow. That took courage. Or stupidity, Elara murmured. I've been told they're often indistinguishable. The evening progressed with careful choreography. Adrian and Elara danced the first waltz together, moving across the silver-traced floor while the room watched. Elara felt the weight of all those eyes, the judgment and curiosity and speculation. But she also felt Adrian's hand steady at her waist, saw the pride in his eyes when he looked at her, and realized she didn't need their approval anymore. She had something better, her own. As the dance ended, Pembroke appeared, looking urgent. Your Grace, might I speak with you privately? They withdrew to a small anteroom, where Pembroke handed Adrian a letter. This just arrived, hand-delivered, marked urgent. Adrian broke the seal, read quickly, and his expression shifted from confusion to shock to something Elara couldn't quite identify. It's from the Crown's Chancellor. They've completed their investigation into Elara Whitmore's fraud case. And, Elara's heart hammered, they've recovered nearly all of your inheritance. The full amount will be restored to you within the month. Adrian looked up from the letter. Elara, you're about to become one of the wealthiest women in the kingdom in your own right. The news should have been purely joyful. Instead, Elara felt a complicated knot of emotions. Relief, yes, but also fear. Money meant power, independence, choices. It meant she could leave if she wanted to, could build a life entirely separate from Adrian's. It meant she didn't need him anymore. That's wonderful news, she said carefully. Adrian studied her face. You don't look like someone who just learned they're wealthy. I'm processing. Elara moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds. For 7 years, I had nothing. I was nothing. Now suddenly I have money, status, a title, everything I lost and more. But I didn't earn it. It was just given back. It was stolen from you, Adrian corrected, joining her at the window. Getting it back isn't a gift. It's justice. Maybe. Elara traced patterns on the frosted glass. But it makes me wonder, if I'd had this money 7 years ago, would Helena have bothered trying to steal it? Or would the presence of wealth have protected me from her in the first place? Probably, Adrian said honestly. Money is armor in our world. The more you have, the harder you are to hurt. Then wealth doesn't prove anything about who I am. It just proves I was born lucky. Elara turned to face him. Adrian, everything I've accomplished in the past 2 months, standing up to Helena, fighting the annulment, rebuilding my reputation, I did that with nothing. No money, no connections, no power except what I could claim for myself. That felt real. But this, she gestured at the letter. This is just inheritance, just luck of birth. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Do you know what my father told me when he was dying? He said the title and the wealth were easy to pass down. They required nothing from me except existing, but being worthy of them, using them for something beyond just perpetuating privilege. That would be my real inheritance, the one I'd have to earn. And have you? Earned it? I'm trying. Adrian's eyes were intense. Every day since I met you, I've tried to be someone worthy of the power I inherited by accident. Someone who uses it to protect rather than exploit, to build rather than just preserve. You've helped me with that. You've shown me what real courage looks like. Elara felt tears threaten and blinked them back. I was just trying to survive. You did more than survive. You transformed. Adrian took her hands. And now you have wealth to go with your courage. You can do anything. Start a foundation for girls in situations like yours. Invest in reforms. Use your resources to change the systems that hurt you. That's not just inheritance. That's power you'll earn through how you use it. The idea settled over Elara like a cloak, heavy with possibility. She'd been so focused on getting her money back that she hadn't thought about what to do with it once she had it. But Adrian was right. She could make it mean something beyond just personal wealth. We should get back to the ball, she said finally. People will notice we're gone. Let them notice. But Adrian offered his arm, and they returned to the ballroom where the dancing had continued in their absence. The evening wore on. Elara danced with other partners, Lord Thomas Hartwell, who thanked her gravely for giving his sister courage to speak up, a young viscount who stammered through a conversation about reform politics, an elderly duke who'd known her mother and told stories that made Elara's chest tight with bittersweet memory. And then, near midnight, the orchestra paused. Adrian stepped forward, and the crowd quieted expectantly. Thank you all for coming tonight, he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. 6 weeks ago, I stood in this room and made a choice that scandalized society. I broke glass doors, defied social convention, and claimed protection over a woman I barely knew. Many of you thought I'd lost my mind. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Some of you still think that, Adrian continued with a slight smile. But I want to tell you why I did it, and why I'd do it again without hesitation. Elara's breath caught. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't planned for Adrian to make any kind of speech. I did it because standing on the other side of that glass was the bravest person I've ever met, Adrian said, his eyes finding Elara across the room. A woman who'd been systematically erased from society, who'd lost everything and been treated like nothing, who stood in the freezing cold knowing she might die, and refused to beg. She just stood there, witnessing her own suffering with clear eyes and unbroken spirit. And when I saw that, I realized I'd been living a half-life, playing at being a duke without ever asking whether the rules I was following, the conventions I was upholding, were worth the human cost. The ballroom was utterly silent now. My wife, Adrian's voice strengthened on the word, showed me that courage isn't about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It's about standing up when you have nothing to stand on. It's about speaking truth when silence would be safer. It's about choosing yourself when the world wants you erased. She did that, and in doing so, she saved me as much as I saved her. He crossed to Elara, took her hand, and faced the crowd together. So tonight, as we dance across this floor with its silver-traced scars, I want you to remember something. Those lines you see, they're not covering damage. They're celebrating it. They mark the moment when someone refused to accept the world as it was and demanded it be better. When glass shattered because cruelty became intolerable. When old systems cracked because people finally chose justice over convenience. Adrian's grip tightened on Elara's hand. I broke those doors, but my wife, Elara, is the one who's rebuilding what comes after. Watch her, support her, because she's going to change this world, and you can either help or get out of the way. The silence that followed was profound. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. Lady Catherine, Elara realized. The applause spread, slowly at first, then building, until the entire ballroom was filled with it. Elara couldn't speak, couldn't move. Adrian had just publicly claimed her not as a scandal to manage, but as a partner to celebrate. He'd turned their story from something shameful into something revolutionary. Dance with me, he murmured, pulling her onto the floor as the orchestra started a new waltz. Let them see what we've built. They moved across the silver lines together, and this time when Elara looked at the watching faces, she didn't see judgment. She saw recognition, understanding, the beginning of change. But she also saw Marina Ashcroft standing near her father, her beautiful face twisted with an emotion that made Elara's instincts scream warning. The dance ended. Guests began to depart, offering congratulations and promises to call. The Ashcrofts were among the last to leave. As they waited for their carriage, Marina approached Elara one final time. Enjoy your victory, she said softly, so only Elara could hear. You've won the battle, the marriage, the money, the pretty speech from your devoted husband. But you should know something. What's that? Elara kept her voice neutral. Adrian was supposed to marry me. Our fathers arranged it before his died. He was going to propose the night of the ball. That's why my father hosted it at Ironvale. But then you appeared in that pathetic dress, playing the victim, and he got distracted by his hero complex. Marina's smile was poison. So congratulations. You've married a man who was manipulated into choosing you. I wonder how long before he resents you for it. The words were designed to wound, to plant doubt, and Elara felt them hit home, felt the old insecurity rise up. Was she really chosen, or was she just another obligation Adrian had taken on? But then she remembered standing on the balcony, remembered Adrian's face when he'd shattered the glass, remembered his proposal in the convent, his fierce defense of their marriage, his speech tonight. You're wrong, Elara said calmly. Adrian chose me every step of the way. He could have walked away a dozen times, could have let Helena win, could have married you to make his life easier, but he didn't. Not because he was manipulated, but because he finally found someone worth choosing. Marina's face flushed red. You think you're so... I think I'm done with this conversation, Elara interrupted. Your father's waiting. You should go. She turned and walked away, leaving Marina sputtering behind her. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. The ability to simply walk away from someone trying to hurt her, secure in the knowledge that their words couldn't touch what she and Adrian had built. The last guest departed near 2 a.m. Elara and Adrian stood in the entrance hall, watching the final carriage roll away into snowy darkness. That went well? Adrian said, assuming well means we survived without any actual fistfights. Elara laughed, exhausted but exhilarated. Your speech was dangerous. You essentially declared war on half of society's conventions. Good. Adrian pulled her close. I'm tired of dancing around what I actually believe. Tired of pretending the way things are is the way they should be. What do you believe? Elara asked. That you're extraordinary, that we're stronger together than apart, that wealth and power are only worth having if you use them to protect people who can't protect themselves. Adrian paused, and that I'm desperately, completely in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. They'd married in haste, built a partnership in crisis, defended each other fiercely. But neither had spoken of love. It had seemed too fragile, too new, too dangerous to name. Adrian? Elara's voice caught. You don't have to say it back, he said quickly. I know this started as protection, as strategy. I know you might never feel. I love you too, Elara interrupted. I have for weeks, I think. But I was afraid to say it. Afraid it made me weak, or dependent, or… Adrian kissed her, deep and thorough and filled with promise. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Loving someone doesn't make you weak. Letting them love you back doesn't make you dependent. It just means you're brave enough to trust. I'm still learning that, Elara admitted. We both are. Adrian took her hand, the one wearing both his rings now. But we have time, all the time in the world. They climbed the stairs together, passing portraits of Adrian's ancestors, generations of Blackmores who'd lived by rules that were crumbling now. At the top, they paused outside the Duchess's chambers. I should, Elara gestured to her door. Or you could come with me, Adrian said softly. Not as an obligation or a duty, but because you want to. Because we're married in fact as well as name, and maybe it's time to make this real in every way. Elara looked at him. This Duke who'd shattered glass for her, who'd fought the world to keep her, who loved her with a fierceness that still took her breath away. She thought about Marina's poisonous words, about doubt and insecurity, and all the voices that said she didn't deserve this. Then she thought about the girl who'd stood on the balcony and refused to beg, about the woman who'd fought asylum orders and won, about everything she'd survived and overcome. That woman deserved to choose happiness. Take me to bed, husband, she said, and watched his eyes darken with desire and love and promise. The months that followed brought changes that rippled through society like stones thrown in still water. Elara used her restored fortune to establish the Whitmore Foundation, dedicated to helping young women escape abusive guardianships. She funded legal aid for those who couldn't afford representation, created safe houses for girls with nowhere to go, and lobbied tirelessly for reforms to inheritance and guardianship laws. Adrian supported her in all of it, using his influence and connections to open doors, to pressure reluctant magistrates, to make noise when people wanted to ignore problems. Together, they became known not for scandal but for change, the Duke and Duchess who refused to accept the world as it was. Helena Whitmore served 3 years of her sentence before dying of pneumonia in prison. Elara felt nothing when she heard the news. Not satisfaction, not grief, just a quiet closure. Beatrice never returned from the continent, and the few letters that reached England suggested she'd married poorly and regretted it. Lord Chancellor Ashcroft eventually withdrew his opposition, recognizing that fighting them cost more political capital than it was worth. Marina married a viscount and moved to the countryside where she could pretend the Duke of Ironvale had never existed. But the real change was quieter, more personal. It happened in the way Elara woke each morning in Adrian's arms and felt safe instead of trapped, in the way she walked through society functions with her head high, no longer invisible, no longer afraid, in the way Adrian laughed more freely, argued more passionately, lived more honestly than he ever had before. 1 year after the ball, they stood again in the same ballroom, hosting another winter celebration. But this one was different, filled with the girls from Elara's foundation, young women who'd escaped situations like hers, who wore gowns provided by the program and danced with partners who saw them as equals. Look at them, Elara said, watching a girl of 16 twirl across the silver-traced floor, laughing with pure joy. A year ago, she was locked in an attic by an uncle who wanted to steal her inheritance. Now she's here, free, planning to study law. Because of you, Adrian said. You gave them what no one gave you, a way out. We gave them, Elara corrected. You fought as hard as I did. Maybe, Adrian pulled her close, swaying to the music. But you're the one who showed me it was worth fighting for. You're the one who refused to stay invisible. Elara looked around the ballroom, at the girls dancing, at the supporters who'd joined their cause, at the silver lines in the floor that marked where glass had once shattered. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, standing frozen on a balcony, believing she had no choice but to endure. That girl had been wrong. She'd always had a choice, to stand instead of beg, to fight instead of surrender, to choose herself even when the world wanted her erased. Dance with me, she said to Adrian, pulling him onto the floor. Right across those silver lines where it all began. They danced as snow fell outside and music filled the ballroom. Around them, other couples joined, young women in beautiful gowns dancing with partners who saw them, truly saw them, for the first time. The silver lines gleamed under their feet, not hiding damage but celebrating survival. And Elara Whitmore, once invisible, once forgotten, once nearly erased, danced in the arms of the man she loved. In the ballroom where glass had shattered for her, in the life she'd claimed by refusing to disappear. The girl no one saw had become the woman everyone noticed. But more importantly, she'd become the woman who saw herself, clearly, honestly, without apology. And that made all the difference. Years later, when people told the story of the Duke and Duchess of Ironvale, they focused on different details. Some remembered the scandal, the shattered glass, the dramatic rescue. Others remembered the legal battles, the foundation, the reforms they'd championed. But those who'd been in that ballroom on both nights, the night Elara nearly died and the night she danced freely, they remembered something else. They remembered the moment when silver lines appeared in marble, when scars became art, when one woman's refusal to stay invisible changed what was possible for everyone else. They remembered that sometimes love isn't gentle. Sometimes it's fierce and desperate and willing to break things, glass doors, social conventions, old systems that hurt people, to protect what matters. They remembered that survival is its own form of revolution, and they remembered Elara and Adrian standing together across those silver lines, proving that the best endings aren't about perfect rescues or fairy tale transformations. They're about choosing each other, every day, in a world that tried to keep them apart. They're about taking what was stolen and transforming it into something that can never be taken again. They're about the courage to be seen, the strength to stand, and the audacity to believe that you deserve better than the world wants to give you. That's not a fairy tale. That's a revolution. And it started with a girl on a balcony who refused to beg, and a duke who finally found something worth fighting for. The rest, as they say, is history.